Hey fearsome friends and happy October. I have some more ominous stories for you, one of which isn't true. See if you can guess which one. Also, don't forget to take a look at my online store for my limited edition Halloween merch. It's available until the 1st of November, and the link is in the description. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. When the event I'm about to share happened, I was 20 years old, and I'm sharing it because I know I'm not the only guy who has gone through it. I also know that as a guy, these types of experiences can leave one feeling confused, embarrassed, or worse. Now, my mother used to be a manager at a henhouse grocery store in the city where I was born and raised, when a job opening became available in the deli. She offered the position to me, so I took it. And I was working with 3 other people, one of which I became fast friends with. His name was Alvin, and he had moved to the Midwest from Louisiana. I forget exactly what he said had happened, but the gist of it was that he had gotten into some trouble back home, and his mom asked Alvin's brother if he could come and stay with him. When I met Alvin's older brother, I was excited to find out that he worked as a sheriff's deputy in the county I lived in. I had actually planned to become a police officer myself once I'd turned 21, so having Alvin's older brother as a sort of mentor made it seem all the more possible. One night, I heard the honk of a car horn in front of my home. Peeking out the window, I recognized the car to be Alvin's brother's unmarked sheriff's vehicle. It was only 1 minute from the grocery store and 5 minutes from his house, so it didn't seem all that out of place. But I was a bit confused as to why he stopped by so late. To be honest, I was kind of hoping he would invite me for a ride-along, which is where a civilian rides shotgun with an on-duty police officer to learn more about what law enforcement does. When I got to the car, he told me to hop in, so I did. "What's up?" I asked. "Alvin went to some rave out in the country somewhere, and I'm worried about him, so I want to go get him," he answered. "I just wanted to swing by and ask if you wanted to ride along and help me search for the location." "Yeah, sure," I said. It was so long ago, I can't really remember how long we drove around for. But where my mother and I lived was already on the edge of the city, so getting to the rural parts wouldn't have taken that long. However, he did drive a ways out, and the darkness swallowed everything that wasn't illuminated by the car's headlights. I had attended many raves in my teens, so I do remember finding it odd that a rave would be held in the rural area we were in. Then at some point, Alvin's brother said, "You know I love you, right?" Now, I was far from an innocent kid growing up, so I was immediately suspicious of this off-the-wall question, whatever it was. "Yeah, bro, you're a good friend," I answered, emphasizing the words bro and friend. "Nah, you don't get it," he replied, in a way that sounded frustrated. "I'm in love with you," he continued, emphasizing the words in and love. "This isn't good," a voice screamed in my head. I sort of glanced at his service weapon on his hip out of the corner of my eyes, and thought, this is really bad. Then I noticed the car begin to slow down, and I looked over at Alvin's brother, who was staring at me, the car now moving at a crawl. "Look," he began, "I'll take care of you. I got a lot of money, so I can buy you a car, a house, whatever you want. Just let me have you." By this time, the voice in my head wouldn't stop screaming. My heart was pounding, and sweat began to slowly drip down my face. "I'm not like that, bro," I tried to explain. "You know I have a pregnant girlfriend. I'm not like that." Now the car wasn't moving, and though it was inky dark around us, a light from the car's instrument panel only glowed a little, and I was able to see the scowl on his face. "Well, it seems the rave may have already shut down," he said after what seemed like an hour sitting in the middle of a dark rural road in awkward silence. He then pulled a U-turn and began heading back in the direction we had just come. And thank God. I finally arrived home after maybe a 45-minute drive of silence and awkwardness, and as we pulled up in front of my house, I went to open the door and get out, but felt his hand grab my forearm. "If you tell anyone about this, just remember." He trailed off as if thinking twice about what he was about to say, and at that he let my arm go and I got out of his car. I shut the door and never turned to look back. I just wanted to get inside my house as fast as I could and lock the door. I never saw or heard from Alvin's brother again after that, and I'm glad. This happened a little while back when I was 15, and I'd just discovered the rebellious act of sneaking out. This was probably my 4th or 5th time doing it, and this one night I decided to go and meet up with my boyfriend. At this point in time we weren't together, but we liked each other, and you know how that goes. When you're with someone you like, you tend to not really pay attention to what's going on around you. The night started out fine, and we were having a good time, but I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, because we had gotten pretty high, but I do remember what happened. We'd met up and gone to this elementary school that had a decent-sized field, with hills and trees towards the end of it, and it's important for me to explain this in order for you to understand how things went down. From where we were sitting, we had a clear view of the school, as well as the school's basketball court, and the school was illuminated from the sidelights, so we could easily see if anyone walked by. But it wasn't necessarily easy for people to see us, and to our left was a little pavement path that led into a townhouse complex. So we were sitting there at the edge of the field, looking at stars and talking about random stuff, when we started to hear the crunch of gravel coming from the school. Now, because we were high and paranoid, we immediately turned our attention to the illuminated basketball court and watched as this guy walked by with his bike and didn't seem to notice us. After he passed, we almost instantly forgot about it and resumed talking, laughing, and just being a bit loud. Then perhaps 10 minutes later, we heard the same crunch of gravel, so we went silent and looked towards the school. Once again it was the bike guy, but this time, once he'd reached the basketball court, he didn't keep walking. Instead, he stopped at the edge of the field we were sitting on, and just stared out at it for maybe a minute or so, kind of like he was looking for us. We were a little creeped out at this point, so we started packing our things to leave. Then this dude began walking towards us, and once he'd stepped out onto the field, it became much more difficult to see him as the light from the school only lit up so much. We took this as our cue to leave, and the only way to do so without being extremely visible was to take the path into the townhouses, so that's what we did. We tried our best to be quiet and walked through the pitch-black path that leads to the townhouse complex. Now keep in mind that we were not sober, so we were extra freaked out. I was checking behind us constantly, and for some reason could not shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. We finally reached the end of the pitch-black path and made it into the decently lit townhouse complex. We eased up a little bit and began trying to find our way to the main entrance and exit, because that's the closest way out, besides the way that we came in. We were walking through the complex and started talking again, when finally we turned the corner to leave, when just then we saw the same guy with his bike right at the entrance. We all stopped for maybe 2 seconds. Then he dropped his bike and darted right at us insanely fast. I muttered a quick profanity, and my boyfriend and I began sprinting as fast as we could away from this guy. We turned random corners and went down little back alleyways, not once checking behind ourselves. I don't know when or where we lost him, but when we became tired and took a stop behind some bushes, we both noticed that there was no man in sight. We stayed in this same spot for about 20 minutes, trying to calm down, and at this point we'd both pretty much sobered up, so we decided to try and leave again. We began walking through the complex once more, and when we made our way back to the main entrance, we both saw that the guy's bike was gone. We were both unsettled by this, because now we know he was no longer in the townhouse complex, and we had no clue where he was, or if he was just going to randomly appear again. Luckily for us, we both made it home safely that night, but I'll never forget the feeling of my heart sinking when we saw the bike guy blocking our way out. It was by far one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. Now my dad, when I was a kid, always drilled it into me to never talk to strangers. He may not always have been the best dad, but he would never want me to be hurt. So when I was spending the weekend with him, as I always did, this happened. Now there's a major highway from where I originally come from, and is called Sunrise Highway. It was exactly 1 block up from where my dad lived. Any adult would know where it was, and you could look up the block and literally see it. This is relevant to the story. I was on my way back to my dad's house on my Razor scooter. I was only about 10 or 11, and that was the new cool thing at the time. I'd been playing with some kids a few houses down the street, and as I'd come to being right in front of my dad's house on the sidewalk, a car, I think it was brown, though I couldn't tell you what make or model it was, rolled to a stop on the street right next to me. This was years ago now, but if I remember correctly, the guy sitting inside it had dark hair, a mustache, and those big wire-framed glasses. I looked over at him and got the worst feeling ever, as I was always intuitive, even from a young age. But aside from that, I wasn't allowed to talk to strangers, and what he asked me, you wouldn't really ask a kid. If you wanted to know where something was, you typically ask an adult, not a small, lone girl on a scooter. He leaned out to the window and asked, "Do you know where Sunrise Highway is?" That was the last straw. Even though I did know where it was, as that made it all the more apparent that this guy should have known as well, particularly given our close proximity to the highway in question. I didn't even answer. I just pushed my scooter as fast as I could up the driveway, and the guy drove away in the opposite direction of the highway. My dad was already on his way outside, as he'd seen the car stop in front of the house, and he got the same dreadful feeling that I had. He said he knew something was wrong. I moved far from where I was born years ago now, and I'm grown up and married with a baby of my own. I think of this story often as I watch my son play, and get a pit in my stomach thinking of anyone like that even breathing the same air as him. From 1998 to 2001, I lived in a small craftsman-style home in the Laurel Mountains, not too far from Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. The home had a twin next door that was built at the same time, but by the time we'd bought our place, the one next door had been remodeled and expanded so extensively that it was unrecognizable. The story goes that the property belonged to 2 brothers, and the brother whose house ended up getting a makeover had 2 sons. But here's the fishy part, which I personally don't buy. Our neighbor in the other house told us the 2 boys were werewolves. I didn't know this part of the story until my husband told me later on, after we had both experienced some strange things, which I will elaborate on in a moment. When he told my husband about this, he invited him in for a tour of his home, and during the tour, he pulled back the carpet to show my husband a stone pentagram, which was built into the slate of the foyer floor. Another fact that was not related to me until later. A month or so passed. We got a really sweet rescue dog, a Sheltie, and she was perfectly friendly, normal and protective over my 7-year-old daughter. But over the following months, she started doing some strange things. I'd get up in the middle of the night to find her growling down the stairs at something, and during the day, as I was watching TV or working in my studio, I'm an artist, she would stand between me and the door to the dining room and growl for an inordinate amount of time. Over the months, she began to get a little unpredictable too. She would wet on the carpet, which she had never done up to that point, and eventually she would bite me. By that point, I was pregnant and scared to have a biting dog around a baby, so I took her to the ASPCA. During my pregnancy, I started sleeping in another room away from my husband, as he snored like a freight train, and it was hard enough to get rest being big and pregnant. When one night I awoke to something crawling up from the foot end of the bed and over my feet and legs. I couldn't see anything though, and was so terrified that I couldn't even scream. I was able to put a hand up, grab the headboard. This was an old rickety double bed that my mother-in-law had given us for our spare room, and slammed it against the wall repeatedly. With that noise, I was finally able to scream, and whatever was on my legs disappeared. I ran to the hall to find my husband running to meet me, asking me what had happened, and I didn't know what to say. That winter, a few months after the baby was born, I was sleeping in that room with the baby who was in his crib, and my mother was visiting. We'd all been enjoying an evening in front of the fireplace, and the whole house was warm and toasty. When we went to bed late that night, probably around midnight, I awoke at about 2 a.m. to the baby screaming, and when I tried to get up, I was so ice cold I could barely move. My mum and husband heard the baby screaming and came into the room to see what was wrong. Then my husband said, "Why the hell is it so cold in here?" The door was open the whole time, by the way, so my mum took the baby out of the room and my husband helped me out to the hallway, beyond the open door, and the hallway and the rest of the house was still toasty warm. Thank God we ended up moving out the following summer. But before we had, my husband said he'd spoken to the neighbor about our experiences, and he said, "Oh yeah, the 2 werewolf boys' father had killed them, and then himself, and the boys' ghosts roam the 2 properties." When I was about 11, maybe 12, my family and I moved out to the middle of some abandoned strip mines in rural Alabama. It was awesome. Going swimming in quarries, lots of abandoned equipment and cliff faces to climb, caves, and miles of trails that were abandoned dirt roads used by the mines to explore. On the trade-off there was a lot of venomous snakes, and at night it was dark, no streetlights, just the occasional porch light maybe every mile or so on the main road. One day in particular, my friend P and I were out on one of the dirt roads that went off to the side of the main mine road. We hadn't been down that road before, but it was about 10 a.m. on a bright summer's day, and we figured why not. We'd gone maybe a mile down when we came to a left-hand turn. Besides that turn, and alongside the road we were walking on, was a small lake. We walked up to it, and were watching small frogs and turtles swimming around, when I suddenly caught movement across the lake. I saw a man walking away from us and heading up the hill. I poked P and pointed. "Who is that? Why is he out here?" We were miles into the mines, where there were no people anywhere. No houses either. We both stood up, and as soon as we got on our feet, he stopped walking. But then within a split second he spun around and came running in our direction. We bolted, and I mean ran like Forrest Gump. I looked back and he was running faster than any human I'd ever seen. He covered the distance in seconds. He had to run down the hill and around the lake to get close to us, and that route was easily 300 yards. P grabbed me and we jumped off the road and into a ditch behind some bushes. I peeked out and he was maybe 30 to 40 feet from us, spinning around in the road and making this god-awful grunting sound. Weirdly enough though, I swear he had an entire cooked chicken in his hand. He was wearing destroyed overalls, dirty boots, and had what I can only describe as a Cro-Magnon brow. Huge. My memory might not be super accurate, given how long it's been, but it seemed like his forehead stuck out a good 4 inches over his eyes. He was the scariest thing I've ever seen. He spun around in the road and started running back the way he'd come. We stayed there in that ditch for almost an hour, afraid to move, listening and watching, in case he was hiding and waiting. We crawled along the roadside, all the way back to the main road. And from there we walked, but stayed in the tree line until we saw the main paved road. Then we ran. We ran all the way back home. And once there we told our fathers, and both of them and P's older brothers loaded up and went looking for him, but never found a thing. All these years later, and it still haunts me. My girlfriend recently took me out to her grandmother's house to meet and spend time with her family. And where does dear old Granny live? Right on the edge of those same trip mines. I told her the story, and she looked really serious and said, "Y'all are lucky. There's all kinds of bad things that happen in those mines." So yeah, every visit to Grandma means the Glock and the 12 gauge ride with us. I was in 4th grade and my family had just recently moved into this townhouse about 7 streets away from the old apartment that we'd previously rented. The state of the latter was decrepit, and the accommodation was ridiculous, hence the move. The neighbours in the former were nicer and more welcoming, and the 2 kids that my sister and I became friends with were the only playmates we had. A total of 11 houses that all looked the same, with the exception of the direction of the stairs. They were 2-story buildings, lined one side with a wall on the other, which separated the townhouse from the neighbouring houses and businesses. Each house had a screen door covering the main door, greeted by the living room upon entrance. The kitchen with the stairs were located on the left for our building, and then the laundry and kitchen on the far end, and aside from the occasional cockroaches that roamed, the place was fairly nice and peaceful. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the 4 of us, my sister and our 2 friends, decided to play catch in the narrow alley that served as a pathway from the main gate. I was standing in front of our door, while they were pinning the next a few feet across from me, and I was tired from doing 3 laps already, so I just leaned on the wall and looked at the screen door. Now the way we assembled the living room is that our full-length mirror was beside the main door, which meant that it was blocking one side of the entrance. It had a protruding table, like wood on the bottom that prevented an adult from standing too close to the actual mirror. Yet when I looked through the screen door, I saw a man standing where the mirror was supposed to be, and half of his body was showing through the partition. He was wearing a fresh-looking barong, and he had his head held low. The way he did it looked unnatural, and I was unnerved. Prior to that, I'd showered the screen door with baby powder. I forget why, so I thought my mind had made it all up, because of the way the product was scattered. I later joined my friends and forgot about it, but later that night I dreamt about the faceless guy, but this time he was wearing a barong that looked old, and he was now inside the house with his face turned away from me, and his head was still lowered in that unnatural way. He used my father's voice, coaxing me to join him in a hug, and explained to me how he felt so alone, and that he could use a hug from his favourite child. However, my father never talked like that, coupled with the fact that my feet felt like I was ankle deep in molasses. I then saw one of my friends through the window beside our door, peeking through the glass, so I tried my best to walk towards her, whilst she called my name, frantically asking me to play. But I was sent backwards instead of forwards with every step I made, until I found myself being hugged by the unknown man's cold arms. He was still coaxing me, almost soothingly, whilst telling me that he was lonely, and all he wanted was an embrace. His hold became tighter and more constricting, and I thought I was going to pass out within the dream, because the more I struggled, the more the hug grew tighter. But it gradually loosened, and I heard a familiar voice echoing around the house, telling me to wake up, and suddenly I could breathe again. And the voice of my father was looming further away, until I broke free from the nightmare, sitting straight up and breaking into a sweat. We moved again after a year, and I never saw the faceless guy again. It turned out no one lasted in that particular unit for more than a year, as they always had a reason to move one way or another, and we weren't going to be the last. I don't know what would have happened if I'd given in to the hug, and it's not something I'm willing to go back and experience again. It's been almost 10 years since it happened, and I still go by the apartment complex from time to time. Nothing has changed, but I still wonder about the status of that house and its future residents. I live in Germany, and one evening decided I'd go for an evening walk. It was about 9 p.m. and was still light out, so I chose to go out to a field road towards the next city, then turn around and walk back. On the way, I noticed a bench on the side of the road facing the field. Then I walked a bit further before I turned back. When I was at the turning point, it had turned dark at 9:45 p.m., so I had to walk back at dusk. My eyes were adjusting so I could at least see the road, so that was fine. And when I reached the bench, I decided to sit down and look at the remains of the sunlight on the horizon, taking a picture and just chilling. Just then I noticed a dark figure coming from the direction I'd come, so my way back. And as he came closer to the bench, I kept my eye on him and said, "Hello." He then returned an "Evening," and kept on walking. I saw he had a hunting rifle with an optic and a suppressor on a sling on his back, and he stopped about 5 meters past the bench and looked back at me and stared for a minute or so. So I decided to get up and walk away. I didn't look back at him, keeping the trees between me and him so he couldn't see me. At this point I would have called it into the police, as you're not supposed to have guns like that in Germany, but I decided to wait because I didn't want to give him the phone light as a target acquisition tool. I walked for about 15 minutes, until I got to somewhere he definitely couldn't see me, and grabbed my phone. I then Googled the local police station number, as I didn't see this as an emergency, and I tried calling it twice, but nobody picked up. Still not seeing it as a case for the emergency number, I took the long way home, as the short way would have still been open field, and I thankfully arrived safely at home. But I won't be going on an evening walk for a long time. Sometime after I turned 5 years old, I had my first and, quite honestly, my only ever experience with sleep paralysis. It started off as a normal night, and my half-siblings were all at their other parents' house, so it was just myself and my parents. We spent the evening watching TV until I eventually fell asleep, and my mum carried me off to bed. To set the scene, I slept in a bunk bed at the time on the bottom mattress, which was opposite of my bedroom door, but faced the wall that the door was on. My parents always left the door open so that they could occasionally check on me, so the light from the living room TV would shine down the hallway and bounce off of said door, acting as a nightlight. From where I slept, I could see down the hallway slightly into my parents' room as I fell into a deeper sleep and began to dream. In the dream, I woke up right where I was, laying under my blankets, staring up at the ceiling and the top bunk. Thinking I'd just woken myself up, I thought nothing of it and attempted to roll over to drift back off to sleep. The problem was, I soon realized that I couldn't roll over. I tried wiggling my toes, then my fingers, then moving my head around without success. The only functions I could seem to perform were moving my eyes around and breathing. Not even making a sound was possible, as I attempted to whisper at first, and then call for my mum. I wasn't scared, more so confused as to what was happening. After 30 seconds or so, however, I felt an uneasy sense wash over me and was drawn to checking my surroundings, feeling like someone was in my room just outside of my vision. I stared at the foot of my bed for a few seconds, but nothing was there. I looked at the side of the bed closet to the wall, expecting a hand to reach out and grab me, but again nothing. Searching the corners of the room, my eyes latched onto something in the doorway, and barely visible, a humanoid form stood in my doorway. The form's composition I can only describe as being made of the heat waves that you see bouncing off of asphalt on a hot summer's day. Dumbfounded, I was forced to sit and stare at the form, because, well, what else could I do in my own body's prison? Seconds felt like hours of this form standing and staring, until finally the form turned and walked to my parents' bedroom. Immediately worried about what I'd just seen, I tried to wake myself up, vigorously blinking my eyes and repeating, "Wake up, wake up, wake up," in my mind until finally I actually did. After gaining my composure, I felt like it was safe enough to turn over and go back to sleep. But I was wrong. Just as in my dream, I found that my body was incapable of moving. I followed as I did in my dream, first attempting to wiggle my toes, then my fingers, then my head, feeling that wash of dread ooze over me when I couldn't make any noises. I checked the spots in the room that I'd originally done, and didn't find anything. At this point I remembered that the form had walked into my parents' room, and realized that they may be in danger when they go to bed later. So struggling to break free from my paralysis, I tried my hardest to move anything I could and to yell. Sensation slowly returned to my body, and a faint whisper was all I could speak, until all at once I was able to move and yell. Screaming and crying, not understanding what I needed to do, I flailed in my bed. My mum quickly ran in to calm me down, as I frantically told her there was something in my room, and I saw it move to her room. She attempted to reassure me that it was a nightmare, and nothing happened, then picked me up. I buried my head into her shoulder and sobbed uncontrollably, and as we shuffled down the hallway, I felt the sense of dread hit me again and was compelled to pick up my head. As I stared down the expanding hallway, from the TV lights shining down it, I saw my mum's shadow, and staring at her shadow, another shadow detached itself from the shoulder and waved at me like it was taunting me. I buried my head back into her shoulder and cried myself to sleep that night. I never spoke about this to anyone until I reached 17 or 18, although my family always made fun of me for how spooked I always was about that hallway, even in broad daylight. Even then it was only to a few close friends, but I recently brought it up to my family. When speaking to my stepmom and now ex-sister-in-law about it, they listened intently, thinking that it was strange, as my stepbrother and nephew always felt uncomfortable when around that hallway too. Today my dad and stepmom still live in that house, and the hallway doesn't affect me like it used to. But the memories of that night feel like they're burned into my memories forever. Garage sales. You can sometimes snap up a real bargain. Vintage clothing, old furniture begging to be restored. That vacuum cleaner that just needs a new hose to be perfectly functional again. Even kids' toys. Kids' toys. When this story is finished, you're going to consider the potential of kids' toys in a very different light, and you won't be able to unsee it either. Garage sales also attract a mixed bunch of customers. Weekend antique hunters, the budget conscious, God bless them, curious passerby, and as I found out after the first and only garage sale I ever held, they can attract sick people too. It was on a Sunday afternoon on the last day of a 2-day garage sale when I met the aforementioned sick person. There was still over half of the things my family and I had wanted to sell remaining on the tables and strewn about the lawn on large picnic mats, and the dwindling crowd suggested we wouldn't be selling much more. He was about average height for a man in his 30s, I'd say, and wore a thigh-length green khaki jacket, denim jeans, and tan cowboy boots. His hair reminded me of one of the Three Stooges, the one with the bowl cut. It was like that, but greasier. His face was peppered with pockmarks, and he had a wispy, almost adolescent mustache. There was nothing in particular about his appearance that made him stand out. Not in this semi-rural town in Western Sydney, at least. But what drew my attention to him was the way he acted. He would pick things up and study them, something completely expected and encouraged at garage sales, but it was the way he went about it. He'd slowly scan the tables, as if he were looking for something in particular, and when he found something that took his fancy, he would pick it up for a closer look, all the while eyeing other customers with suspicion or fear. If any of them got too close to him, he turned away. I thought he was going to steal something at first with his creepy display of paranoia, so I went over to greet him. "Afternoon, mate," I said. He flinched as if I had just caught him in the act of doing something he shouldn't be doing. "Hi," he said. It was almost a whisper. Our eyes met for a split second, before his went back to surveying the items on the table. "Were you after anything in particular?" I asked him. He seemed not to hear me, or simply ignored me. Then he spotted something on my table my son was standing behind. My son's table had old toys, video games, books, and things an 11-year-old has outgrown. He made his way over to it, his eyes locked onto whatever he had spotted, like he was trying to stay focused on someone in a crowd. He picked up whatever it was, and I saw my son look up at him, then took one or two cautious steps back. What he had in his hands was the Incredible Hulk smash hand. That's singular, because one of the pair had broken. It was a hard rubber fist, modelled on the Incredible Hulk's, that you put your own hand into like a glove. When you smashed the fist on something, it made a loud cartoonish, boom, crash sound. There was a small gap where the fingers curled to make the fist, leaving a small cylindrical opening through the middle. "What do you want for this?" the man said, his eyes glued to the prize in his hands. I said. "It's supposed to make some sounds, but I'm not sure if it's still..." My son grabbed it out of the man's hands and slapped the bottom of it with an open hand. Boom, crash. "Yep, still works," he said. The man snatched it back, giving my son an incredulous look, as if he was taking back his wallet from a pickpocket. "So," I said to the man, "how does $2 sound?" He put the toy under his arm and fished out a fluoro-pink Velcro wallet, one that looked like had been used since the mid-80s when they were popular. He tore the Velcro fastener open and sprinkled some coins into his other hand, then using his thumb counted out $2 in 50 and 20-cent pieces. He held out his hand and motioned for me to take them. "Thanks, mate," I said. His eyes jittered around like he was checking to see if anyone saw the exchange. Then he hurried off down the street in the direction of the reserve. "Why do you think he wanted that, Dad?" my son asked. "No idea," I said. "Adults can enjoy playing with toys as well, I guess." A few more people stopped by that afternoon, but no one bought anything. At around 4 p.m. we decided to call it a day and packed everything we didn't sell into boxes. I took our smooth-haired bull terrier Roxy for a walk to the creek just behind the reserve afterward. I was around 50 feet into the bushland, just beyond the reserve, when I saw movement in the bush up ahead. There was never anyone that far off the trail, apart from groups of kids or teenagers occasionally, but this person appeared to be alone. I stopped and watched. Whoever it was, it seemed as if they were trying to push a large rock, but not having any luck making it budge. This movement was accompanied by a rhythmic grunting. I became aware of another sound as well, a familiar one. In fact, one that I had heard earlier that day. It was the sound of the Incredible Hulk smash hand. Boom, crash. It was unmistakable. I crept slowly towards the figure as the noises continued. I stopped dead when I got close enough to recognize who it was. Even though his jeans were around his ankles and his back was to me, I recognized the jacket, which mercifully covered his bare ass. I could also see something on top of the rock at waist height that he was feverishly thrusting into. It was the Incredible Hulk smash hand. He was having sex with it. Every few thrusts, it would sound out, boom, crash. As horrifying as it was in itself, I think I felt more pissed off than anything else. Here was a pervert who had bought something that was once a Christmas present to my son, and was now having sex with it in the bushes. "Oi!" I yelled. He heard me but didn't turn around. If you're having sex with a child's toy in public, or even in private for that matter, and you hear someone yell, "Oi!" turning around to face them isn't really necessary. He pulled his hips away from the rock and frantically pulled his pants back up. The view I got of his naked ass as he bent over was another little bonus I didn't need. He ran off into the brush, trying desperately to zip up and buckle his belt at the same time. Roxy barked, and he ran faster until I could just make out the sounds of leaves and sticks crunching under running feet recede deeper into the trees. Then it was quiet. I approached the scene. I probably shouldn't have. The circular gap where the fingers curled around into the palm was slick with something and glistening. The mess splattered all over the top of the rock suggested he'd had his way with it several times. I slowly backed away in horror. The must-have child's toy of 2008, a Christmas hit, sold out in stores weeks after hitting the shelves, was now dripping and stinking, violated, on top of a lone rock in residential bushland west of Sydney. But it gets worse. About 3 weeks later, I was sitting at the kitchen table when my son burst in, running through the front door. "Dad, Dad!" he called out. His excitement was palpable. He ran into the kitchen holding the Incredible Hulk smash glove. "Look what was in the bush behind the reserve." He put his hand into it and smashed it on the table. Boom, crash. "Still works," he cried. I hate garage sales. At some point when I was high school aged, I was with my grandfather and a couple of cousins at Burger King on a Sunday afternoon, all dressed in our Sunday best. We ordered our food. Everyone was trying to get their drinks, and I was standing there waiting since I didn't know where we were going to sit. When an old man walked up to my male cousin and started talking to him out of nowhere. But while he did this, he made direct eye contact with me that he didn't break for a good 20 to 30 seconds. I've never seen anyone else ever stare so intently at a person they weren't even talking to. We sat down and ate, with the old man sitting with an old woman a few tables over. He then got up mid-meal to get something, and as he walked by our table, he purposely and noticeably walked slower, whilst staring at me. I didn't look up, and acted like I hadn't noticed, while secretly dying inside. Before we left, it looked like the man wanted to talk to my cousin again, but we got out before he could get a hold of him. Once outside and in the car, I asked my cousin what the man had said to him, and my cousin told me he was talking about the girl behind the register and that he wanted to ask her when she'd graduate from high school so they could go on a date or something. It wasn't even about me at all, as I had suspected originally, but it still let me know where his intentions laid. He was dubbed the Burger King man, and a few weeks later we went to the same Burger King. After we were done eating, and I was throwing away my trash, I noticed the same man loitering around the restaurant. My grandpa wasn't ready to leave yet though, as he always has to get a drink refill. But I tugged on my cousin's arm and told him we should go. And when we got outside, I told him that I saw the Burger King man again. He said he saw him too, and it looked like he was going to try to talk to him again. What this man's deal was with sharing things with my cousin, I have no idea. But I haven't gone back to that particular Burger King since. I'm just not interested in encountering a creep again. At least I find the story kind of funny now, since my cousins and I got our own cryptid out of it. Beware the legend of the Burger King man, coming to a franchise near you. This story is from 17 years ago, when I moved to another state during the summer between 10th and 11th grade. The new high school that I went to was known for being the richest one in the state, so many of the kids who went there had BMWs, luxury vehicles and sports cars. It was more common than not, but I was definitely not rich. That's part of the reason I didn't have a girlfriend for very long at that school. There's no hate from me, and I'm not bitter about it at all. I never was. I just learned very quickly, and I easily accepted the reality that rich kids like to do things that cost money. But if you don't have money, it's kind of hard to maintain any kind of relationship, even a romantic one, with people who have money when you don't. Anyway, let me tell you about a dating horror story that occurred during this time in my life. So I had seen this girl walking up and down the hallways from time to time. She had this really quirky but sexy walk that went one foot in front of the other with a shake of her hips with each step. It's hard to describe, but interesting to see. And let's call her Jane. I didn't have any classes with her, but somehow we met anyway, and we started talking and hanging out regularly. We even skipped classes together to hang out, and we spoke on the phone regularly, even had phone sex a couple of times. I was pretty sure that we would be high school sweethearts, and that I was going to lose my virginity to her. Now, like I said, her name was Jane, but she told me her name was Angelica. She told me she was 17 like me, and also in 11th grade like I was. She told me that she was rich like the other kids at that school, and that she was in all advanced and honors classes, and also that she didn't care that I wasn't rich, and that I didn't have a car. One day I was walking down the hallway, and I was approached by Jane's friend, along with a fellow member of the wrestling team. I had no idea how those two knew each other, but there they were, and they wanted to talk to me. They asked me to join them in the cafeteria, so we found a table to sit at. Now remember, at this time I thought that Jane's name was Angelica. So the guy and the girl said to me, "Look, we need to talk to you about Angelica. First of all, her name is not Angelica, it's Jane. Angelica is her little sister's name, and she likes it better, so when you met her she used it instead. She's also not 17, she's 14. She's not a junior, she's a freshman, and she's not in honors classes, she's in special ed. She's also not rich, and lives in the same trailer park as me and the guy from the wrestling team. We all grew up together, and played outside when we were younger. We've known her for most of our childhood, and she's been a pathological liar for as long as we can remember. We just talked it over between ourselves and wanted to let you know. It felt like the right thing to do." They went on to tell me other stories about her. Apparently Jane was fascinated by Egypt, so she told people that she was from there, and that she was also a direct descendant of Cleopatra. She also claimed that she'd ridden camels before. So this bombshell that just unexpectedly exploded on me felt very disturbing, and it was a real bummer too. I knew that for her to be messed up like that, something had to be wrong in her home life. But I also knew that I wasn't qualified or able to help her, so I decided to ghost her, because I didn't want her problems to affect me. I also knew I'd never be able to believe a word out of her mouth ever again, and as time went on, I heard other stories from other students about crazy things Jane had said, so it was all true what this guy and girl were telling me about her. Now, any time Jane called me from then on, I'd either ignore the call or I'd answer and give an excuse as to why I couldn't talk. At school, I avoided her by being the first to leave class and just going straight to my next class so that I didn't have to encounter her in the hallways during passing period. The worst part about having to avoid her was the fact that after the last class of the day was over, kids would linger in the halls or in front of the school with their cliques in order to chat and laugh amongst their friends before going home. At that time, she would come over to hang out with me among my group of friends, so I had to stop doing that after school was over and just head straight over to wrestling practice, because it was more important to me to avoid her than it was for me to socialize. I dropped out of high school the next year, and I joined the workforce. I was fresh out of high school and working now at age 18. High school was behind me, but I still kept in touch with a few friends. A buddy of mine named Josh told me that he was fooling around with Jane for a while there. And I looked at him like, WTF, and this dude told me, "Oh, it's cool, man. She's a lot hotter this year. She grew her hair longer, dyed it blonde, got some cooler clothes and waxed her upper lip." Now, for the record, I never noticed any hair above her upper lip, and I always thought she was a pretty girl. But I never understood why he felt the need to convince me that she was hot. So I said, "Dude, you're messing around with a girl that we both know to be mentally ill, and you're worried that I'm judging you over what she looks like." He got the point, but he kept doing it for a while until he also dropped out of high school and lost touch with her. Then one day I went to Hastings to buy a CD, and as I entered the store, I saw a flyer with Jane's face on it and a caption that read, "This is my daughter Jane. If anyone knows anything about her whereabouts, please call me. I'm her mother, and I'm worried and I miss my daughter very much." There was also a phone number listed. 6 months or so went by, and I met with Josh at the food court in the mall to have lunch, where he was also working security. Josh said to me, "Dude, you'll never believe who I saw here the other day. It was Jane. She saw me and came up to me and said, 'Josh, is that you?' No, I'm Josh's twin brother, Jeff." And then she said, "I never knew Josh had a twin." So I told her, "That's because I went to military school." She then said, "Oh, well, tell Josh that Jane says hi and that I got kidnapped and taken to California and raped." Then she just walked away. I told Josh about that missing persons flyer with her on it that I'd seen at Hastings however long ago. However, sometime later, we found out what really happened. She'd actually run away from home and stayed at a friend's house for 2 weeks until her friend's parents asked her to leave. I never did see her again after high school, and I don't know whatever became of her, but I always hoped that she got the help that she needed. Back in the 70s, my mother would bring my younger sister and I to the mall and would let us wander off alone whilst she shopped elsewhere. I was about 7 and my sister was 3, and somehow I ended up in J.C. Penneys because my sister and I loved hiding in clothes racks when I noticed a tall man watching us. He was smiling and seemed friendly, so I wasn't afraid of him. He asked me how old I was, and when I told him, he said something like, "You're the same age as my niece, and her birthday is coming up. I want to buy her a cute pair of shorts." He held up a little pair of purple shorts and asked, "Will you try these on for me, to see if they fit? She's the same size you are." Now, being the people pleaser that I was, I readily agreed to try on the shorts. So the man brought me to the dressing room, which was nearby the exit of the store. I didn't think anything of this, because I had no fear of people and had never been taught stranger danger. I went into the dressing room with my sister, dressed into the shorts, and came out of the dressing room. Then the man knelt down in front of me and started touching my hips. I thought he was checking to see how they fit me, when all of a sudden he looked up over my shoulder, quickly stood up and sprinted out of the door. I watched him running like a bat out of hell across the parking lot and disappearing between the parked cars. I don't know who or what he saw that made him run off like that, and I didn't understand what was happening at the time. I just changed back into my own clothing and never really thought about it. I never told my mother about it until years later, but I always wonder who or what the creepy guy saw that made him stop what he had planned to do with me. I'm very thankful for whatever made him not follow through with it, though. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.